Well, hello everybody. I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
And we want to welcome you to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical. Part of that family life might be having family devotions. And we've talked about some of the reasons you ought to do it and some of the reasons you might be struggling with it.
And how to overcome them.
But let's say, okay, what do you want to put on the list? What's your agenda? How do you want to structure this in your family?
Well, what does it look like? Because, honey, there are people listening who didn't grow up in Christian families.
Right.
They've never seen this happen.
Well, and a majority of Christian families, so many Christian families don't have devotions. It's, that's probably more people have experience of not having devotions than the other way around.
So let's talk about what kind of things might you include in your family devotions?
Well, okay. I would think you primarily, absolutely, you've got to have the Bible.
Yeah.
You need to have some time in prayer. There's other things. Worship and song is good to add in there.
Some memory work, learning Bible passages or verses.
Yeah.
Maybe a catechism.
Yeah.
Do you have to do everything every time?
No. And that's an important thing because, if you got little kids and no older kids, you're going to want to keep things kind of quick moving and simple so that they can comprehend it and concentrate for that time. Whereas if you've got older kids, maybe you do more. Maybe you take a little bit more ambitious approach. And so it's just something you have to figure out for your own particular family in that stage of life. So
let's talk about some of those different things and what they might look like themselves. Like, what about worship and song?
Okay.
Well, we talked about if you're not comfortable singing. We talked about that in the last episode. But what kind of things might you include?
Well, okay. You know what? You could talk about the songs that you sing in your own church. You can make notes of what you sang each week and go home and sing those hymns at home.
And our church usually sends out a list of the hymns that they're going to be talking about that week.
So
you're going to be using the next week, and so you can
practice ahead of
prepare
time
for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your family can sing out.
So you could do that. Maybe you've got particular hymns and songs that were your favorites when you were a younger believer. Then you want to pass those along.
Impacted you. Yeah. Be sure to share those with your kids. One of the things that we've done that has been a real blessing is what we call the hymn of the week, and that's where we pick a hymn.
Right.
And on Monday, we'll sing every verse of that hymn, maybe tell a little bit of the history of it or why it's important.
Well, that's the thing. All week long, we sing that whole hymn, every verse, every day.
Yes.
But like the first day, we'll explain the first verse.
Yes.
The second day, we explain the second verse, and so on.
Yes, because 5 verses is pretty typical for a hymn. And every day you sing all the verses. So by the end of the week, your kids sung that entire hymn 5 times.
Right.
And that is a great way for your kids to learn hymns, and more than that, to truly worship because they know what they're singing and they understand it.
Well, because what Paul says in there is that we should let the word of Christ dwell in us richly with all wisdom, and teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. And so, you know what? Our hymn singing is something that should be instruction and encouragement, teaching and admonishment. So we need to be thinking and singing with our heads as well as with our hearts.
Now, if you're wondering, what does that look like? We have a resource actually on our site at raisingromen.com.
Right.
Just hit the shop, and it's called Christ-Centered Advent. There's 2 volumes.
Yeah.
We hope to have volume about Easter out soon. That will lead you through, with using Christmas carols, what that looks like to draw everything that you can out of that passage.
That's right.
Out of that verse.
A really good resource if there's hymns that you remember from your childhood, but you can't find it in your reference books
Maybe
at home.
You can't remember quite how it goes.
Or you can't remember the tune. There's a resource called Hymnary, hymnary.org, which is a fantastic online hymn book.
And you'll put a link to that, right?
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes, yeah.
Well, what about memory work, Hal? I know a lot of people really focus on that. Some people ignore it entirely. We've done better at it sometimes than others. One thing to think about is whether it's better to memorize individual verses or to memorize passages.
And I don't think there's a right answer to that, because sometimes there's a single verse that you say, this is a verse that you need to remember. And other times there's 2 or 3 or 4 verses in a sequence that kind of carry a whole thought.
And it actually gets kind of easier to memorize, oddly enough, 4 or 5 verses that are together and part of one thought than it is one verse here and one verse there and one verse there.
Yeah.
Because often once you start, who couldn't start with "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want"?
Yeah.
We all start immediately going there in our heads.
Right.
And
right.
so, it's helpful, I think, to help us remember the rest of it. And that brings up, we need to teach our kids those classic passages that they're going to be wanting to refer to all their lives.
Yeah, and there's things you can just start building a list, yourself. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That Genesis 1:1, that's a foundational verse. That God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should have eternal life. John 3:16 is a foundational verse. And there's a bunch of those passages that every Christian should know just internally.
Yes.
Okay, and so those are great things to talk about. Now, one thing that's a useful tool is a catechism. Okay,
Yes.
Some people say, "Well, I just believe the Bible." Yeah, I know, we believe the Bible too, but a catechism is a way to help organize our thinking about what the Bible teaches altogether. Because there's passages, there are concepts which are important, like the Trinity, which is hard to say. And here's the proof text right there, but rather to say, all the scriptures contribute to give a full picture of who Christ is, who we are, what our great need is, what a great gospel is presented to us. And a catechism is a question answer type of format to help our children learn to think in an orderly way.
Yeah, and that can give them that knowledge of theology they're going to learn to deal with people who are teaching wrong theology as they go through their lives.
Right.
And I love the catechism for boys and girls. That's the one we used. It's a Baptist catechism.
Yeah.
And it's like, it starts out, who made you? God made me. What else did God make? God made all things. Why did God make you in all things?
For his own glory.
It's usually said by the little kids, for his own glowy.
Glowy, yeah.
So cute.
Yeah, that's a very simple thing, but it does lay a groundwork there to keep us in remembrance. So.
Now, before we talk about prayer and Bible reading, let's hear from our sponsor.
Okay.
Looking for a Bible to encourage the girl in your life? The NIV Kingdom Girls Bible is a beautiful new Bible that will inspire girls ages 8 to 12. It contains 400 features and colorful illustrations and highlights famous and sometimes infamous women of the Bible. Special notes will encourage girls to apply Bible passages to their lives through prayer, art, and activities. Go to NIVKingdomGirlsBible.com for a free sample and to learn more about this amazing Bible. Visit NIVKingdomGirlsBible.com today.
All right, so we're talking about family devotions and what are some components of your daily devotions with your family might look like. Prayer.
Prayer is an important one, and I think it's really important to hear what our kids want us to pray about. I remember when our oldest went away to college,
right,
and his little sister was maybe 4.
Yeah.
And I remember I'd say, "What do y'all want to pray about today?" Yeah. And she'd say, "Can we pray that God will let John Calvin come home forever?"
She felt like we'd send him to prison or something. Yeah.
But it made me realize she was lonely for him, and I would call him and let her talk to him. But you get to hear your kids' hearts when you ask them, "What do you want to pray about today?"
And you know what? It's important that our kids hear our prayer needs as well. That we're concerned about a situation at work, or that there's a situation in the church, or that we have a financial issue that we're concerned about, or just we're going to be busy and we need energy. They need to know that we depend on the Lord and we seek provision from the Lord as an example that they should do the same.
We need to lead our kids in prayer. Sometimes we need to ask our kids to pray too, because we want them to be comfortable praying in front of their families. And you learn that when you're little and your mom says, "What do you want to pray about? Let me help you pray." And we've had kids that were resistant because they felt embarrassed, but we helped them gently and lovingly help them learn to pray. And if you feel awkward about praying in front of other people, you and your kids can learn together.
Yeah. So, foundations. Let's talk about Bible reading and the Bible study. You know what? Here's the thing. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be really sharp and snazzy in a production or anything.
Your
It's
kids
just
don't need a Bible degree.
no,
You know?
no, they don't. They don't need a full stage presentation either. They need somebody that will just read the scriptures and explain them,
Yeah.
and help them to remember how one passage may relate to another one, or one thought may relate to another. What we found very effective is just to pick a book.
Yeah.
Just pick one book of the Bible and start.
We tend to alternate New Testament, Old Testament.
Yeah, and then just read straight through there, Genesis or Matthew or whatever, and just read a thought. It doesn't matter.
Enough to make a complete thought, and that might, in some cases, some of Paul's verses are very long.
Yeah.
It might be a verse. It might be it's often a paragraph.
It might be a whole chapter. Some of the historical books, for example. So, but just read a part and then talk about it.
Talk about it.
And say,
you don't have to preach a sermon.
Mm-mm.
You can discuss it as a family. You can mention some things that you notice in it or that you found applicable to your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a big deal.
That's right. Don't be afraid of it. It's something that you're just opening up with your children, and God will help you to understand, and God will help you to communicate it, and He will help them to understand and to take the instruction too. So we trust God with that. We just try to be faithful in our part of it.
Absolutely.
Here's the thing. We got to remember this. Deuteronomy chapter 6, God said through Moses, "These words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise." You know what? That's all day long. Your family's devotional life is not 15 minutes in the morning. It's all day long. And so as you have opportunity to say, hey, the Bible tells us we need to behave in a certain way. Maybe you weren't behaving that way. Or maybe you need to say, this thing you heard about in the news, the scriptures tell us about this. Or, whatever you find in life that points you back to the Lord and to His Word, you bring it up. You talk about it with your kids. That's how you have this sort of sit in your house and walk by the way and lie down and rise up kind of daily devotion.
Because Christianity is more than about Sunday morning.
It is. And you know what? We really have to focus on one thing, recognizing that as we are discipling our children, they are going to receive our teaching when there is a relationship that underlies
That's
it. When
right.
they know that we love them and we trust them and that we respect them and we expect them to respect us. We have a mutual kind of thing there. That sort of relationship primes them to hear what we have to say. And so we need to recognize as our kids are going through life that we need to always be cultivating that sort of trust and love with our children, both for their spiritual development and for our family.
Because when they leave home, that's what you're going to care about. You're going to, not math or spelling or how clean your house was. Yeah. You're going to care about discipleship and relationship, their relationship with God and their relationship with you.
A survey several years ago of 10,000 millennial adults that were raised in the church as children, they looked at the ones who continued in the faith when they made their own decisions afterwards, and they found that the one thing that correlated for all of them was a strong relationship with a believing parent. Okay? That it is important that they have that relationship, not just that they be exposed to the faith, but they be exposed to it in the context of a loving relationship within their family. And so we want to encourage you to do both those things, to teach them and to love them.
Because you know what? You can't save your kids. Only God can do that. But you can make sure you have a good relationship with your kids, and you can make sure you're teaching them the Word of God. So love your kids, work on your relationship, and have family devotions.
Okay, look, we appreciate you joining us. And if you didn't see the first episode, go back to the first episode. We talk about some of the struggles, because those are real. But we also have some hope that we can offer you there.
And come check out our family devotional resources at raisingrealmen.com/shop.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see some of them based around holidays, which makes it easy to plan a short time to focus on this.
Right.
All right, y'all.
So look, we appreciate you joining us and hope that you'll join us again as we take biblical principles into the 21st century family. Until then, I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Thanks for joining.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
You've been listening to Making Biblical Family Life Practical with Hal and Melanie Young. If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web at halandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/Hal and Melanie or Facebook.com/RaisingRealMen. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.